got excited. That's when I started writing the book. I mean, this could be basically a photo, essentially, captured at the moment of the resurrection, which is pretty exciting.
Welcome to the Unrefined Podcast, where we unravel the mysteries of life, challenge the status quo, and explore the supernatural through a biblical perspective. I'm your host, Brandon Spain, along with Lindsy Waters. We invite you to stay connected and discover how to access exclusive content by visiting unrefinedpodcast.com. Now, let's begin this week's journey. Hey, you guys. We are back for another awesome episode of Unrefined. And thank you, Jen, for joining us. The topic today is something that I've been I've been trying to get someone on the show for at least 2 years to talk about. The coolest thing about it, and I'll introduce him, is that he's not just coming at it from a religious standpoint where a lot of other ones do. He's coming from a science standpoint. So from neuroscience to quantum mechanics to mysteries of the faith, today's conversation ventures into one of the most debated relics in history, the Shroud of Turin. His new book, Shroud-Pilled, which is coming out in November, I think, unless it comes out earlier, we'll ask him in a sec, tackles the evidence, controversies, and implications with fresh insight. Join us once again on our show is Dr. Trevor Lohman. Hey, Trevor, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah.
Thanks for the nice intro. I did not expect to be writing a book about the Shroud of Turin, but here we are.
No, when you said it on our last podcast, I was like, this is what I've been waiting for. There was a guy that and I'm going to put my cards out here right at the beginning. I'm biased about this. I believe it's real. And boop, there you go. Reveal. It's all out there. But I think there's some good evidence that it's not too. And I guess we will get into that. And
yeah, that'd be fun. I'll put my cards on the table too. I kind of, started hearing about this a few years ago. And I'm like, well, of course it's not real. So, but I was like, but let me look into it. And, I never would have considered writing a book about it. I don't know anything about archaeology. I'm in neuroscience research. So I was like, but I could probably read these papers and decipher them. And for the most part, I could get into X-ray crystallography and stuff, and it's a little over my head. But I realized that the foundational argument, like the core piece of evidence, if this were a court case, is really, it's either going to be proven or disproven by statistics. And that actually kind of is my expertise in neuroscience, is spatial statistics. So I was like, well, hey, I could take a crack at this. And that kind of started me on this path of digging into it. And then once I realized, not to get too far ahead, that really the main kind of critique of the shroud is probably actually not valid, which is the 88 carbon dating.
Yeah.
Then I kind of had to okay, well, let's just re-examine everything. And I sort of talked myself out of it about halfway through reading the book. I was like, no, it's possible that this is man-made. And then by the time I got to the end of the book, I'm like, no, I think there's a better explanation for some of the odd findings on the shroud. All of the critiques I've heard can be more or less disproven. I think maybe you guys will have some stuff for me today that will change my mind, but there's some pieces of evidence in support of its authenticity that I don't know how to explain. That doesn't mean maybe there's some magical thing they could do back in 1325, but I certainly don't know what it is. You kind of have to believe in a miracle either way, has been my conclusion.
Yeah, or space aliens.
Either, one of the two.
Before we get too far, and if somebody has heard of the Shroud of Turin but doesn't know what it is, can you give us a little bit of history, a little bit of background on it?
Yeah, so this has been around, this cloth, which is linen made from flax fibers, has been around, and this is what everyone agrees, at least since about 1355. And this has been thought for the last 700 years. This wasn't the carbon dating that made us come up with this date. Now, there's evidence that places it much deeper into history that I think is pretty compelling, but we all agree, the most skeptical person agrees, at least for 700 years this thing has been around. Now, those who believe that the Shroud of Turin is a real artifact of Jesus Christ think it's his actual burial cloth. And there's a lot of reasons for that we can kind of start getting into, but I'll leave it there. Even the Catholic Church didn't even really think it was real for some time. This is critique that, hey, this is just the Catholic Church trying to have another cool relic that people want to come see.
Yeah.
But they didn't think it was real.
Yeah.
At the time, it was the anti-Pope Clement. This is when there was the schism,
Yeah.
And he said, if you're going to display the shroud, this was back in 1389, I think, you have to say it's not real. It's just an artistic rendition. The owner of the shroud didn't like that, but he did it so he could display it. And it wasn't until they took a photo of it, the very first photo that was ever taken of the shroud in 1898, this guy named Secondo Pia. Italians had so many kids back then, they named them after numbers. I love that. My wife's grandfather is Ottavio. He was the eighth son. So Secondo was the second son, Secondo second. And he was a lawyer, but he was kind of a hobbyist photographer. Not many photos have been taken back then. He took a photo. The shroud itself is not amazingly impressive when you look at it. I mean, it is. It's cool. It's this big cloth that has an image of the front and back of a man. There's some evidence of like blood around the head from potentially the crown of thorns. There's a wrist wound, all sorts of interesting things. But it's when you look at it in negative that it becomes really high detail, which is the opposite of how things typically work. Like if I were to take a picture of you and look at it in negative, your hair would be white, your skin would be black. It wouldn't look high resolution. It's not until we develop the photo, it looks high resolution. The shroud's the opposite. And so when Secondo looked at the negative, he was like blown away because it's the face of a man. It's exactly how you would expect Jesus Christ to look. It looks just like the Pantocrator image. It looks like medieval and older paintings of Jesus. So you're like, wow. The conclusion that he kind of came to, and this is a big part of the argument, is that the shroud is a photonegative. It was created the way all photonegatives are created, by light. And so this has kind of led to this idea that it's maybe not just evidence of the crucifixion, but evidence of the resurrection. And so that's the shroud.
So, Trevor, that argument, it being a negative image, does that kind of change a lot of the, I guess, arguments people have against it? Like, I'll just throw one out there that stood out to me, the whole face cloth from John 20, that if this image was created by resurrection power, it was what I'm assuming they're saying, that the power of the resurrection kind of burned this image into it. Is that kind of the argument? Does that change, in your mind, people's approach to the physical evidence, sort of scientific and rationalistic arguments against it?
There's like 4 or 5 different things there I want to talk about.
Okay.
Because you brought up John. So that's another, we'll put John aside for a second. Let's just talk about, because that's an interesting point. But let's just talk about the whole image creation thing. So, I mean, there's one of the mysterious things about the shroud is it looks like a photonegative. It encodes depth data. Now, this is like debate. If you go on Reddit, there's like a lot of angry people talking about this. I'm not suggesting like it's a memory chip or something. When I say encodes depth data, I mean it encodes depth data like the way an X-ray does. Like the closer to the receiver, in this case the linen, that the object is, the darker it is. The more it's quote unquote burnt into the cloth. Although it's not burned, that's an important distinction. But we'll get into that later. So it encodes a degree of depth data. So what you can do is you can assign a vertical relief to each degree of darkness. This is something you might do on an MRI or an X-ray to make something look 3-dimensional. And so you can do that to the shroud. You can say a really dark pixel, I want it to come out 6 inches from the cloth. A white pixel, I want it to be flat. And you can do that. You can take an image of it with a literal X-ray imager, and it becomes 3-dimensional, the image. It's like a 3D rendering of Jesus. And so why that's interesting is it not only has the properties of a negative, it really has the properties of something that was created by a light source or energy source, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add to that the fact that there's no brush strokes. There's no obvious indication of paint. There's a guy, like a shroud critic, I guess you would call him, Walter McCrone, who found some red pigments, but he found lots of different pigments in places that don't make sense. It's not as if the image were actually created by pigments.
Well, he claimed gelatin was on there or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. He has I think the pigment was like red ochre, but he also found vermilion and gelatin and stuff. But I mean, this thing has been around for at least 700 years. We think maybe 2000.
Yeah, and the chances of somebody trying to touch it up, I mean, come on, I would have. If I would have known the significance, I would have tried to touch it up or make it look better or whatever.
And when you're doing, and not even that, like people used to press paintings up against it to like be blessed. There was like a cult of worship around the shroud in the 1500s. So this thing has been handled for, at least 700 years, they found marine seaworm DNA in it from being close to the ocean. They found all sorts of stuff in it. But I'm not going to try to make the case that it was made by whales just because I found marine DNA, you know? So
Love your logic.
there's contaminants in it, but the image isn't made of the contaminant. So it's an important distinction. It's just a weird skeptical thing. People are really, this is a sidebar. The psychology around the shroud is interesting.
Yes.
Because,
Mm.
the pro
Passion.
authenticity camp is much more scientific right now. Now, I'll say they've obviously got a dog in the hunt. Like they think it's real and they're trying to prove it's real. And I've talked to a lot of these guys and they don't, they're not shy about the fact that they think it's real. And that's really not necessarily how you're supposed to do it, but that's fine. The skeptical people, they're like angry about it. Like they're emotional. Like they're seething. You read some of these posts on their websites and it's like, oh, you need this thing to be fake. You don't want it to be fake. You need it to be fake, And so I think that's kind of an important distinction. Most Christians are okay with the shroud not being real.
Yeah.
Like if I read it and I'm like, oh yeah, this is obviously a forgery, it wouldn't shake anything.
Mhm.
I want it to be real because it's cool. It's physical evidence of the resurrection. Obviously, this is awesome.
Yeah.
But the skeptics, they need it to be fake because it would completely change their worldview and conception of the universe. So,
Well, it wouldn't change their worldview. It would shatter their worldview.
oh, absolutely, yeah,
Mm,
absolutely.
mm.
And so anyway, it doesn't seem like it's a painting. Now, some of these things are explained by what would be called a bas relief, sort of, not really.
All right,
but
what is
like-
that?
Yeah.
If you were to make a statue of, a man that you're trying to get to look like Jesus, but then you shorten it, you make it like 2 inches deep, and then you put a cloth over it and you rub it with like a pigment, you could get an image. And if you make that pigment acidic so that it sort of degrades the fibers and then wash all the pigment out, potentially you could be left with like a impression. The thing is, all the renditions of this that people have done, scientists have done, it doesn't do it. It's just not. It's super low detail. The depth encoding is really bad. And this is before you get into forensic evidence. There's this other fact about the shroud that no one talks about. I'm actually hesitant to even bring it up because it's like, I've never heard anyone talk about it. I'll save that for later. But it certainly doesn't explain this property that we'll get to. So it's just not compelling. Honestly, the best skeptical argument, in my opinion, and I have a chapter called Unlikely Allies because the atheists, they love to quote scripture. When I was an atheist, which I was for a long time, nothing got me more excited than like using scripture to disprove an argument, which is so like petty and silly. But they love to quote John, especially. So John's account of coming to the tomb is like the most problematic for believing in the shroud's authenticity. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it sounds like there's a shroud, a linen shroud. John's more problematic. Although if you read John carefully, and it depends which version you read, it kind of sounds like he's referring to multiple linens and that the face linen was folded up and set aside before he got there. And so you can kind of look at a few of the different versions. It's tough to say. But he does mention linen strips, which is fine. I mean, that's reasonable that there would have been strips tied around the shroud. But all of the accounts mention Joseph of Arimathea having a nice linen. And so that's kind of an important feature here. And all of the accounts mention linens in the tomb. And so I don't really see like a strong contradiction with any of the gospel accounts. Like the King James version, I think is like maybe the worst, which would have been the version relevant to like Calvin and stuff when he was criticizing this absence of the shroud from the gospels. And then the other critique from the Gospels is, well, wouldn't they have mentioned this image of Jesus in the cloth? And so I think that's maybe a better argument. However, in positive, the image isn't that mind-boggling. You would see it and think, oh, this is from blood, sweat, and it might be overshadowed by the fact that the resurrection had just taken place. A faint stain on a linen cloth might not have like seemed like the most important detail in the world. Also, if it was created by UV light, which is kind of the idea here, in a particular kind of UV light, which we will get into, the image probably wouldn't have been very dark at first. So the cellulose and the linen would have been altered, and it probably darkened over time for several hundred years, and now it's actually starting to fade again. So most likely, it would have been not really that noticeable at the time, so it's totally reasonable that it wouldn't be featured prominently in the account. That's my opinion, at least. So I don't know if you guys have any questions about that.
What you're saying sounds very reasonable. It's a lot of times the arguments get so passionate that you can't see reason. You can't, logic it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the light of Jesus being alive, okay, we'll save these things for later.
Right.
But also, Scripture doesn't tell us every single detail about everything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
not everything is in there. What we need to know is in there. And this would make us sit outside of that. But that is, I'd never heard these arguments before. I just kind of like put this in the bucket of, okay, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. My faith doesn't rely on it
Yeah.
one way or the
Yeah.
other, but it's fascinating. And I can also
Yeah,
see,
I think that's the right spot.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to agree with you. I think that's the right way to think about this. Yeah.
And I can also, as a woman, and I'm just saying that because I also love fabric and I have a lot of linen. I knew if Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy man, if we understand correctly, and he had a tomb and he offered that tomb, he would have had nice linens in there. And fabric today is very different. You can go to the store, you can get it, whatever, you can get lots of
Right.
it. It wasn't then. You had to weave, that was probably woven, use a loom, or it would take a long time. You had one garment and it would for a long time and you had to wait till the next one was woven. So something like that, linen would have been picked up at some point, folded up and kept, because you don't get rid of that. You just don't. You keep it and you keep it and you keep it. That makes sense to me.
And there's actually a critique that it was maybe too nice to be as old as people claim it is, too advanced. It's like a 3-in-1 herringbone pattern. I haven't really been overwhelmed by the evidence for that. It just seems like there's someone out there who wants to prove that it's not real, and they found someone who knows quite a bit about fabric, and they're like, oh yeah, that doesn't really seem typical for the time. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was atypical for the time. It doesn't mean it couldn't have been made back then, was my conclusions.
Yeah.
And also, there's some artistic evidence that it sure seems like people painting these paintings had seen the shroud much deeper into history than medieval times. I mean, to believe it was made by people like to say like Da Vinci, but it's too old for Da Vinci. This person would have had to really been incredible. And I know there were some Renaissance masters, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of reasons why it couldn't have been made by them. I mean, they would have had to, let's just launch into it. They would have had to take blood from a human that had started to coagulate. Okay, so not fresh blood, not dried blood, but blood that had started to coagulate. And they would have had to place it first before they did any art onto the places where they knew they were going to draw the wounds, because the image didn't transfer through the blood. So the blood was there first. And the degradation of the blood, it kind of indicates that it was in contact with the cloth for 2 or 3 days. There's no evidence of like discoloration around the mouth, which would happen from decay or anything. So if they did use a real body, it would have had to been like a living body. And then they would have had to have blood that was already coagulating. And then they would have had to somehow transfer the image with like a rubbing without messing up the blood stains. They would have had to have a pretty good understanding of anatomy. Now, I don't think the anatomy thing's not a great argument because they knew their anatomy back then.
Yeah.
It's clear,
Yeah.
But this is like a level of clinical anatomy that it's questionable whether they would have had. For example, the thumb is in like a boutonniere deformity position, which is like consistent with like a median nerve or flexor pollicis longus injury. That's like a level of detail that's questionable for me. Also, the arms are a little too long, which is like a huge critique. People, I love these contradictory arguments. People will simultaneously say they were anatomy experts, but also they got the arms too long, And it's like, well, now we know that the Romans tractioned the arms before they nailed them to the cross. And so like literally with like ropes would traction the arms out to make it really difficult to breathe, which is why asphyxiation was the cause of death typically. And also the nails are in the wrist, which people also make a big deal about this. I could go either way. I think it's relevant though, because all of the medieval artists draw the nails through the hand. And so if you're a medieval artist faking a relic, why add controversy? Why make a wrist wound? Make a hand wound, but they made a wrist wound. And we know that many crucifixions had the nails through the wrist. Not all. Some would be through the hand with rope, but many through the wrist. These are just details that it just feels unlikely that a medieval artist would know. And we don't know, we don't have another example of one ever being made like this. And this is where it gets really crazy. Have you guys heard this camera obscura? Have you heard of this idea? Okay. And so there's this idea that Da Vinci in particular liked camera obscura, which is this idea you put a pinhole in like a dark room and it will project an inverted image of, whatever's outside that room.
We did that as a kid.
It's like a medieval camera. Yeah. And so there's this idea that they could have taken the linen, painted it with photoreactive salts, and put it in a dark room and then hung a corpse outside the window and inflicted the wounds, the wrist wound, the crown of thorns wound. And over the course of days, transferred the image. But there's a lot of problems with this. One, the corpse would, decompose. So the image would change over time. Maybe they used a statue and put wounds somehow on the statue. Okay, maybe. But camera obscura images, they don't last more than a few days. I mean, maybe a few years, but not 700 if you believe it's medieval. So it's really just people grabbing at straws. Like, this thing has to be fake. It's a predetermined outcome. Like, this thing can't be real. How did they do it? And that's fine. That's kind of how science works. But as we go on, you'll see there's just too many things.
Yeah. So when you're saying, going back a little bit to the blood on there, are you saying that in the layers of what is on the shroud, the bottom layer is blood, congealed blood, and then up from that is where you get the image in the layers of the fabric?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's not really layers because everything is incredibly superficial, but the image didn't transfer where there's blood stains. So it kind of leads you to believe that the blood was on first. It prevented image transfer. The image itself is incredibly superficial. It's one of the reasons why it can't be paint. It would have to be if it was faked, it would have to be like somehow they'd only have to get like acid to contact the top fibers without seeping more deeply, which it's not, there's just no explanation that is reasonable. And so there's one explanation that makes sense, and that's intense light. It doesn't fluoresce under UV, so it's not a burn. It's not a scorch. The blood does fluoresce. And so it's probably blood. And they found red blood cells and they found human proteins. There's debate. The blood's a little too red. But again, blood that has been exposed to intense UV gets turned red. And so again, that's another piece of evidence in the UV camp. We can just get into the UV thing. Or let's get into the carbon dating thing. Do you want to do that?
Yeah, because that's the one forensics thing that to me doesn't. All the other forensics actually prove it, and this is it's their biggest argument. But it's actually, if you did a 1 through 10, it's like the number 8 feasible one. So anyway,
the carbon dating thing. This was completely devastating to anyone who really believed the shroud was real, because people didn't make the history argument as much back then. That pre-1988, because there is evidence that it is the same fabric as what we call the Mandalion or the Shroud of Constantinople. Let me just say that history, and then we'll get into the carbon dating. So, if you were like day one of your history degree, you might think that the best way to trace an artifact through history is to like do a Google search of the Shroud of Turin, I guess. But obviously, it's only called the Shroud of Turin when it's in Turin. It's not called the Shroud of Turin if it's in Edessa or Constantinople or Lyrae. It's called the Shroud of Lyrae, the Shroud of Constantinople, the Shroud of Edessa, right? Yeah. And so if you're willing to accept that obvious premise, you can trace it pretty deeply back into history. This knight, by all accounts, a noble, brave man who died defending his king. All these names are French. I'm going to mess it up. But Geoffrey de Charny. He for sure had the shroud in 1355. He had just gotten back from the Fourth Crusade. So the idea is that he would have been in Smyrna, Greece. And there's a lot of evidence that after Constantinople was sacked in 1244, that the shroud was moving to Athens. And so he would have been in a position to encounter the shroud. He was a very wealthy man. He was one of the most famous knights in Europe. He definitely could have purchased it. We don't know that for a fact, but it's very reasonable. And the Shroud of Constantinople came to Constantinople in 944. And the descriptions of the shroud in Constantinople sound just like the Shroud of Turin. Now, there's a weird aspect to this because sometimes the Shroud of Edessa, which is where Constantinople got the shroud from, which goes back to at least like the 4th century, is often painted as just the face. But interestingly, it's painted as the face on a rectangle, a white rectangle. And the Shroud of Constantinople was described as being folded 8 times and placed in a case so that just the face was visible. And so, they've done plenty of reconstructions where if you fold the shroud 8 times, you can easily display the face. It looks just like the Mandalion. And so also many people who saw the shroud arrive described it as an image of a full body, front and back, a faint stain, which is how you would describe the shroud if you didn't know the science of it. So there's just a ton of evidence that it probably goes all the way back to at least the 4th century, but probably further. Because then now you got to start thinking that a 4th century artist did this amazing thing. So the case gets harder and harder.
Yeah, more unbelievable.
And people were pretty okay with that chain of events until they did the carbon dating. So they do the carbon dating. It was supposed to be a bunch of labs, but for whatever reason, they just picked 3 labs, Zurich, Arizona, and Oxford. They show up, they cut a piece of the cloth, they argue about where to take the sample. This is like pre-dawn darkness in the cathedral, pair of scissors, and they take it from a corner. Right away, this was kind of scandalous because the shroud survived a fire. It was owned by the House of Savoy, and they put it in a silver casket, and they worshipped it like a cult, and it caught fire, and the silver melted and burned the fabric. And so there's a lot of evidence that it was repaired after that. This would have been a house with means to repair a fabric. And so there's a lot of evidence it was repaired, and the edges in particular. So they took a piece, they dated it. It's leaked to the press that it's medieval. A few days later, they announce it's medieval. The Catholic Church does the same thing. They say, yeah, it's a forgery. It's 1325. There's a range, like 1260 to 1390. A bunch of money exchanges hands, which is kind of a part of the scandal after that. Big labs get built in Oxford and stuff, but whatever. That was like the end of the shroud. Like no one talked about it because that 1325 date, that puts it right at Geoffrey de Charny, 1355. It's very close. And there's actually some people who claimed it was fake back then. A rival bishop who was losing tons of money due to the new cathedral in Lire that was built for the shroud. All his pilgrims stopped coming to Troyes to the north, and they started going to Lire. And so he wrote a letter saying he knew it was fake, right? And so this evidence all fits together like really nicely. Like if you were the prosecutorial team, you'd be like, okay, here's our story, right?
Yeah.
We got the carbon dating, we got the accusation that it's fake, and we know it was around in this area in 1355. Boom. And so I grew up, you guys probably all grew up, just if you even had heard of the shroud, it was like this fake Catholic relic.
Yeah.
And they want us to think it's real, but they didn't. They've from the very beginning acknowledged like, who knows, Anyway, so some time goes by, and it's odd because they won't release the raw data. Now, it's a Nature paper that they published in 1989. Nature's usually, having tried to publish in Nature, they're very demanding as far as like your methodologies being public and your data being public and stuff, but this wasn't for some reason. And they're just writing letters and it's just not happening. So this guy, this really smart guy, he uses what's known, what's publicly available to show that picture a rectangle. And so Arizona got 1/3 of the rectangle, Zurich got 1/3, and Oxford got 1/3. And within each third of that rectangle, they take multiple samples. And the locations of those samples are known. So you can make like a spatial map of all the datings on this sample. And so he is able to prove definitively that the shroud gets younger as you move from left to right significantly. It's actually so linear and so dramatic that the shroud would be in the future if you followed that math formula all the way to the other side of the shroud. And so this is an example of systematic bias. So statistics are great at random bias. Like if there's a little bit of error here or there in either direction, that's what statistics are for. But if there's systematic bias, that's not good. You can't use statistics really for that. And what it suggests is that there was a repair, probably like right here. And as you move towards the repair, it gets younger. And so this was the claim. It's a really, for people who are into statistics, this is like, okay, it's not valid, but for the general public and even the rest of the scientific community, that like really wasn't satisfactory. For me, I see that. I'm like, oh yeah, this stuff, they dated the wrong thing. They didn't date the shroud. They dated a repair to the shroud. But this guy, Tristan Casabianca, who I've had the opportunity to speak with a little bit, he did a Freedom of Information Act request, which I didn't realize England has, but to the British Museum, and they sent him everything. Actually, they sent him half the stuff, and then he wrote another one. He had to go get the rest from the British Museum. And what he's able to show is cotton contamination, which is probably what the repair would be. And he also is able to show that all the labs perfectly date their controls. So they have fabrics that they know to be 2,000 years old from Egypt, from other places. They date it perfectly. There's no disagreement between the 3 labs. On the shroud, they all get different numbers. And so in their paper, they just average them and publish it. And it didn't even meet the statistical criteria for calculating what's called a confidence interval. But you'll hear online still to this day, 95% probability that it's 1325, which is just really, If you know
Biased.
statistics, it's
It's
yeah. Well,
biased.
it's not biased. It's just completely invalid. It transcends bias. And so here's what we know. But let's go back to the control thing. If you can perfectly date something, you know your process is correct. So the carbon dating is working. But then when you go to date this other thing, you all get different answers. It's not that the carbon dating is flawed, it's that you're all dating different stuff. You know, one guy's dating a cotton repair, one guy's dating half cotton repair, half original shroud, one guy's dating a sample that's contaminated with dyes that were used to yellow the cotton repair, right? So you're all dating different things. You're not even dating the shroud. And so the argument devolves into, well, carbon dating works or carbon dating doesn't work. I think we just all agree carbon dating works pretty good, right?
Mm-hmm.
The problem is if you're not dating the item of interest,
Correctly.
it's pointless. You know, if I just date my door, I can't say the Shroud of Turin is 60 years old. So in my mind, the carbon dating is completely bunk, completely refuted, but we can't carbon date it again. The church is not going to allow them to cut out the face of Jesus, because that's what you would need to do. You would need to date the image to make sure it's not a repair. So at this point, we're left with non-invasive dating, and the non-invasive dating says it's 2,000 years old.
Can you explain carbon dating? Just a flyover view. What does that mean, carbon dating?
Sure. So you can tell the carbon-14 that has a certain half-life. And so based on the presence of that isotope, you can determine how old something is. So you can date basically the year the flax died that went into making the linen.
Okay.
So anything that's carbon-based, wood, plant material, tissue from a living organism, you can date with carbon dating. And so I'll give you an example that might even make more sense, like the pyramids. It'd be cool if you could carbon date the pyramids, but they're made out of rocks, so you can't carbon date them. But if there's a piece of wood in the pyramid, you could date that, right? And so if you date that piece of wood, you say, hey, it's 4,000 years old. But how do you know that wood was placed there the same day the pyramids were made? Someone could have moved into the pyramid, built a fire, because it was, I don't know, whatever. You get the idea. And so it's kind of the same problem with the shroud. It's like, I trust that the dates they got accurately reflected the samples they were given. Those samples just don't belong to the original linen that Joseph of Arimathea purchased. They come from somewhere else in history. And so I think you can pretty confidently say at least that test is very flawed. And it was just so convenient, that this fire and repair happened in the 1500s. And so the date they get is 1300s, because there's probably some original material in there too, mixed together.
Mhm.
And they go, oh, hey, 1300s. We know this guy had it in 1355 or whatever. It's medieval. And so based on that, the shroud was determined to be fake. But we got to throw that out. We got to change that reconception. And unless they're going to do carbon dating again, which I don't think they would.
Yeah.
We have to rely on non-invasive dating. And so they've done non-invasive dating. They've done X-ray scatter. So you can basically look at how X-rays scatter going through a linen fiber of a known date. Say you have a linen fabric that is 2,000 years old, and you have one that's 1,800 years old and 1,500 years old and 1,200 years old and 1,000 years old. You can build a calibration curve. You can build a line that tells you what X-ray scatter should look like in a piece of linen that's a certain age. And so the shroud perfectly matches a 2,000-year-old fabric from Jerusalem. However, there are criticisms of that study too. Really, he should have predicted the ages of known fabrics. So he should have had some other 2,000-year-old fabrics to test, and maybe they'll do that. This was De Caro, who's an expert in X-ray crystallography. I'm trying to be critical of both sides,
Yeah.
But I would say, as far as the dating, the evidence is stronger for the 2,000-year-old camp than the 700-year-old camp, which is when I got excited. That's when I started writing the book. I was like, what? So yeah, this could be basically a photo essentially captured at the moment of the resurrection, which is pretty exciting.
Well, let's talk about the history. You mentioned earlier that the history is a pretty good indication of the authenticity. Can you explain, go into that?
Yeah, I would say it's at the very least, the history is just, the skeptics like to present the history as if it is settled, and that's just definitely not the case. We went into a lot of it already, but
yeah,
basically they like to think that the shroud appeared in 1355 that Geoffrey de Charny hired some unknown artist who happens to be like a master of photonegative painting or something, and painted this thing as a relic, as a fake relic, so that he could build a cathedral. Basically, what happened, he was captured in an English war prison, and he prayed that he would be released, and somewhat, we don't know the details, but somewhat miraculously, apparently, he escaped. And so when he got back to France, he mailed the Pope and said, I'm building a cathedral, and I'm going to commemorate this answered prayer, and I'm going to take this linen that's in my family and display it there. And so that's what happened. And so that's kind of where the story starts if you're skeptical. But, again, it's this issue of, it was called the Shroud of Lyrae then. It might have been called the Shroud of something else before then. And right around that time, at a war that Charny was involved in, the Shroud of Constantinople was moved to Greece, where he went, right before he got the shroud. And so in the Shroud of Constantinople, the descriptions of it match the Shroud of Turin. So it's not like this huge leap of faith to think that maybe it had been in Constantinople as early as 944, where it was brought from Edessa in Turkey, I believe. And that goes back to King Abgar, who wrote Jesus to be healed. And apparently the disciples actually brought him the linen. That's sort of the idea. Obviously, we don't know. But this is kind of the proposed custody. And I think it's pretty reasonable to take it to at least 944 Constantinople. And then you say, well, where'd it come from? We know it came from Edessa, and it was there for hundreds of years. So who in 500 AD made this one-of-a-kind artistic rendition with 3D depth encoding, high-resolution photonegativity, perfect forensic evidence? I mean, there's serum rings in the bloodstains, and serum rings happen if blood contacts cloth after it's already started to coagulate. If it's been coagulating too long, there'll be no serum ring. If it's fresh blood, there'll be no serum ring. It's only blood that's already been coagulating, which fits the crucifixion account. The lashings are present in high detail. The ankle is dislocated, which is what you might expect to nail it, to put the foot flat and nail it. The arms appear to be tractioned. There's a thumb injury, which is consistent with getting a nail through the carpal bones. There's a spear wound that looks like it's a mix of blood and pleural exudate, which we expect would be the case. It's described blood and water going on the centurion's face. So you couldn't ask for a better piece of forensic and physical evidence of the crucifixion. And the historical evidence does not dispute it. That's really the case I'm trying to make. Not that the historical evidence is like this rock solid proof, but that it doesn't dispute anything. Neither do the gospel accounts. So that brings us to how it was made. So this is where it gets the weirdest, but I'll pause there if you guys have any questions.
Yeah. My biggest question, I guess I'm just a kid at heart, but it's just simple. Why? Catholic Church has made has deemed numerous things relics, some dubious, some not. I mean, a Catholic will tell you that.
Yeah.
And why try to make such a complicated relic if it doesn't make sense to me? The why?
Yeah, I mean, why try to make such a complicated relic and not claim it's real? If you're gonna make this world-class relic like no one's ever made before, you're not gonna say, it's not real. You're gonna say, yeah, it's real, and if you want to see it, you gotta come do a pilgrimage to our cathedral and pay. And so, yeah, it just doesn't. The motives don't really add up. It's odd. The motives of the accusers make perfect sense. The people who are losing money because of the shroud say it's fake. That makes sense. That motive makes sense.
Yeah.
But the motive, and people want it. The French king tries to get it. It's kind of moved from rich family to rich family. It's spent time in castles. It's been in caravans across the Mediterranean. I mean, it's been cherished. When I forget which king acquired it later, but he named it as his life's most important accomplishment was obtaining the shroud. So these people certainly thought it was real.
Mm-hmm.
And so for what it's worth, but I think people get very excited about the forensic evidence. I'm not a microbiologist. I look at it, it's compelling. I mean, they talk about, high creatinine and high ferritin evidence, high bilirubin evidence of torture, that the blood came from a tortured man. I just don't know enough about the chemistry to say whether or not I agree with that. The papers are very compelling. Obviously though. It's just the image creation process itself, which is like the big mystery. And people kind of dismiss some of the things, it's in my book, but there was an Italian scientist who made a fake of the shroud. And people point to that like, oh, look, you can do it. And it's like, well, also keep in mind, he has the shroud as a reference. So he's not operating blind. Like he knows exactly where to put the blood stains before he puts the image. And even still, it doesn't look good. It's nowhere close, And people have tried many times to improve upon that. And it just hasn't.
With our technology.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The only way they've achieved something similar is with intense energy. So I'll just get into the craziest part. No one ever talks about this as far as I know, but Dr. Fonte, he's like the main shroud proponent. He's on a lot of these papers saying that it's real. And he's an engineer. He's a faculty member at the University of Padua in Italy. Incredibly intelligent guy. He did this work with plasma. And so have you ever gone to a museum and there's like the electrode in the middle and a glass ball? And when you touch it, the electricity goes to your hand.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so that's an example of a plasma emitter and a receiver. The glass is a receiver, a dielectric, and then the emitter in the middle emits electricity. The problem with it being light is that you would think the face would be kind of distorted. This is also the problem with it being like a image transfer with bodily fluids. Like if you were to wrap fabric around my face and then pull it off, my face would be super wide, right? Because it would be getting the sides of my head too. But this looks like a photo of a man. And so if you guys are curious, you should Google Christ, the Pantocrator, Shroud of Turin overlay. It is amazing how similar they look. And but anyway, so it's like an image of a man. So if basically Jesus's body were to just emit a ton of light, you would expect more distortion. Some people say, that's debatable. But if instead it were more like a corona discharge, which is a type of plasma where the UV light travels along the electrical field lines like a plasma ball, you would get an image that pretty much looks like this. And this is normally I would dismiss that right away. Like, okay, whatever, your cool hypothesis, but prove it. The shroud has something called double superficiality. And so what that means is there's an image of the front and back of his body on one side because the linen was folded over him, right? And so you can see like an image from the top of his head in between the two images of his front and back of his body.
Wow. So, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
that's
yeah. You should. Wikipedia has a pretty high resolution, but it looks better in negative. So I usually put it into Photoshop and invert the colors. But
yeah.
But anyway, so you have the front and back of his body, really superficial, which is a key distinction. It's the top threads. It's not even like the top bundles of fibers. It's literally the top fibers. It's like 20 to 200 nanometers deep. So it's not paint. It's not acid. It's not burns. But then on the other side, okay, so picture the sheet laid out on the ground. You see the front and back of Jesus's body on it. If I were to turn the linen over, there's another image on the back. And the fibers in between have nothing in them, okay? And so there's only one thing that creates this double superficiality, and it's a corona discharge. If you were, and Fonte does this, he takes like gears, he puts them on the fabric, he applies a corona discharge to the gear. There's an image of a gear that looks kind of like the shroud image, and then you flip the fabric over and there's a fainter image. And so I don't know what you make of that. I don't know much about plasma. I can't tell you whether or not that would make sense, but it just does seem like there is an intense, we can call it burst of energy and light. I should tell you that plasma emits an intense UV light, which is what the actual image was created with.
Yeah.
So it does seem about 2 to 3 days after the cloth first contacted the body that there was an intense burst of energy, we'll call it, but maybe more particularly plasma and UV light. And UV light degrades the cellulose in the linen, and that's what the image is from.
So, all right, I have to ask. I mean, this particular doctor's doing these experiments with the plasma and gears and stuff, but with what you know about this, could we possibly create this today?
There's not
like that?
Not an explanation that satisfies all the observations. No, not that I'm aware of. Even like they've used lasers to do discoloration that looks pretty similar, but then there's no double superficiality. And they've done the bas relief rubbings, but it's low resolution, and then it doesn't really encode 3D data. It doesn't explain the forensic evidence, and there's no double superficiality again. The obscura, camera obscura, wouldn't last very long. It actually would be higher resolution. If you look up a camera obscura image, they're like photos. They are photos. And also it wouldn't explain the double superficiality. See, the thing about camera obscura, this is like an important point. When you take a photo, I'm not measuring the distance from the lens to your face. Like your cheek is a little bit farther away from the lens than your nose, right? Your cheek doesn't show up like lighter. It's based on the reflective properties of your skin.
Mm-hmm.
And so camera obscura is like a photo. Like if my beard would be darker because it's darker, but in Jesus's image, it's not capturing reflective properties. It's an inverse of the distance from the cloth. So as things get further away from the cloth, they get lighter. As they get closer to the cloth, they get darker. So it's not a photograph in the same way that a typical photograph works. It really does seem like the light source was not a reflection off of Jesus's body, but Jesus's actual body. And so that has a different effect in the creation of this relic.
Do you think there's any other fabric or artifact or anything like that we know of that has similar properties?
No,
I mean,
people reference the Mandalorian, but I mean, I think there's pretty good reason to believe they're the same thing. And so the only evidence of the Mandalorian we have are paintings.
Icons, yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I don't think so. There is the Sudarium of Oviedo, which people think may have been his face cloth. Now, Dr. Fonte doesn't see any reason why image transfer wouldn't occur through the face cloth. In fact, if the face cloth is wet, he thinks that part would be higher resolution, which is what we see. The face seems to be higher resolution than the rest. However, if you read the gospel accounts, certain versions, it does seem like the cloth was applied for the transfer to the tomb and then removed before he was wrapped in the linen shroud. So there's different potential explanations. The Shroud of Oviedo does not have any image transfer. It has blood stains that are a pretty good geometric match to the Shroud of Turin blood stains, but it's all debatable. The scientists argue about this stuff. But so to answer your question, no, I mean, there's nothing like it. It's one of a kind. Yeah. I was emailing Dr. Fonte about this, and I was like what? Just I don't know. Just tell me more. It's like what's important? What's important to you about this? And he says, and I think this is really insightful, that we couldn't ask for a better piece of evidence for the resurrection. It's actually uncanny. It's almost too good to be true, right? It really is like perfect. And I would say overwhelmingly, the evidence points towards this authenticity, but we can't know for sure. Like we don't actually know. And he goes, I don't think we can know. I mean, that would negate your free will. If you knew that it was evidence of the resurrection, you'd have no choice but to believe. Maybe some psychos would still not believe in this. But so it's just like God. Like there's a lot of evidence that he's acting in your life, but you can't really know the way the way oxygen and hydrogen react in a test tube, right? Like you can't know. At some point, you do have to say all the evidence is pointing to one conclusion, and I'm just going to choose to accept that conclusion. And so I think that's kind of a good way to look at the shroud. I mean, all the evidence seems to say it's real. Now, if in 10 years they do some study with some new technology that proves without a shadow of a doubt it's only 700 years old, I'll be like, oh, wow, okay, incredible. I'm going to want that miracle explained to me, but cool, still, okay. But I just don't think it's going to happen ever. So we'll see.
Trevor, how much do you think Protestant iconoclasm, we'll call it, shaped people's skepticism of the shroud? I mean, obviously Calvin was tore out of the frame about it being fake. And
yeah. I think Calvin said we either have to say that John is a liar or that the shroud is fake. Those are our choices. And I don't know. Obviously that shaped things. Although I do think like the scientific debunking of it was probably came more from a place of, atheism and secularism, right? But certainly our willingness to accept those conclusions might have been partly based on this. I don't know. I don't really know a lot about these kinds of things. I'm a new Christian, so I'm still learning all the history and stuff, but man, it has to be a big part of it. And it is kind of unfortunate because when you read Calvin's like critique and when you read the different versions of John, it really is not. There's nothing in John's account that refutes the fact the Shroud of Turin could be real. in my experience, and certainly not in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I mean, those to me are like perfectly explain the shroud's existence being viable. You guys think it's real?
I'm on the fence leaning towards it being real now.
That's where I would say I am too. Yeah.
And what you've presented, I mean, I was in that camp, much more Protestant, and kind of as a kid thinking this is something that Catholics use to raise money and worship something beyond, not Jesus, or worship an artifact. And so then it was like, oh no, I don't even need to know about it. But this is so compelling. This is so interesting. And it's complete uniqueness. And yeah, my mind is just kind of blown. I'm much more like Lindsay. I'm leaning towards this could be the real deal. Not that my faith hinges on it.
Yeah.
And not that like, oh no, everything's because they say it's not true, then it's not true and it crumbles my faith. No, like that. But this is
and the only reason it's a quote unquote Catholic artifact is that Geoffrey lived in France in 1355. That's why it's a Catholic artifact.
Yeah.
If he had lived in England however many 100 years later, it'd be an Anglican artifact or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it really just is like a happenstance of history, and the Catholics like the relics, of course. But as far as like a money-making thing for them, I mean, it really wasn't. In the first few years, the Cathedral of Lire definitely profited off the shroud. But the Cathedral of Troyes lost an equal amount of money. People stopped going there. And then it basically was hidden away. And it's not displayed now. You can't go see the shroud. So, I mean, there occasionally it will come, like, I'm not actually sure, like 30 years or so, they might show it for
viewing.
But
Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, but to your point, I kind of thought the same thing. I was like, it's just another relic, but it's not. There's something you can't quite explain.
Real quick, I had the wrong idea for years about. I just pictured Jesus covered head to toe, I guess, with blood. I don't know why. They washed him afterwards. And the cloth smeared against him made the image. And that's...
Yeah, me too. And that's what everyone believed. I mean, this is what people believed in 1370. Everyone just kind of believed this because they never saw it in negative. That's the crucial detail I probably didn't hit home enough is you don't realize how special it is until you try to take a picture of it. And you look at that picture in negative and you're like, oh my God, this is a photorealistic image of a person. This is not a smearing from sweat or blood. And so that's really 1898 is really when people go, oh, this is incredible, which is kind of another argument against the idea that this was just something like the Catholics were trying to exploit because until 1898, they didn't think it was real.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And even today, I don't think they have a super strong stance on it, which is probably, for the best, I guess.
Well, I have one question. I just want to close out with this, but without spoiling too much about your book, what is the most surprising conclusion or personal transformation that came about to you through this project?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, the idea that I would write a book about the shroud is kind of insane.
A neuroscientist.
This is like not my area really, but
quantum thing, you have an interest in that. So, I mean, it's kind of quantum,
Oh,
Definitely.
no, I mean, now I'm fascinated, but I look back like what would, 20-year-old atheist genetics major think about me writing a book about the Shroud of Turin? I don't think he'd be very happy, but that's a badge of honor for me now. So yeah, I went into this kind of thinking it was real. I had seen some of these interviews and I had seen some of this stuff and I was like, oh yeah, it is really hard to explain. I mean, I had read DeCaro's paper about the X-ray scatter and I was like, this might be real, but let me approach this skeptically and just really dig into it. And so I went straight to the skeptical arguments. I went on the Reddits, I went on the medievalshroud.com. I read and read and read, and I kind of talked myself out of it, actually. I was kind of like, yeah, okay, maybe not. It wasn't until I read the rebuttals to the arguments that I realized how flimsy the critiques were and how cherry-picked they were. Like, they would present a critique that they say there's no explanation for, but then there's an obvious explanation. And so I know that they know the counterpoint to their points, but they're not sharing it. So it just felt, it didn't feel like a good faith discussion. Like I was really sensing, because I do peer review stuff. I mean, you push back and forth, but there's never like unless someone did something like fraudulent or horrible, it's not like you die on the hill. Like you don't mischaracterize their arguments. You don't lie. You don't cheat. You discuss, You try to be humble. Maybe you change your paper, maybe you don't, maybe you push back. But it just became clear to me that the skeptical position was like obsessed, like enraged, like, and would mischaracterize things in a way that just didn't feel honest. And, there's probably a little bit of that on the pro side too, but it just really was like alarming to me, like how
there's an axe to grind. There seems like there's an axe to grind. Yeah.
And how little actual science was being done on that side of the argument. There's just actually no experimentation going on. All the experimentation is on the authenticity side, other than the 1989 paper, which we based on the 1988 analysis. So that was the most eye-opening thing to me. That's when I said, okay, now I got to really dig into this. And then halfway through digging into it, I was like, I might as well write a book about this because that's the best way to learn a topic, is to just force yourself to write about it. So now on the other side, I kind of think it's real. And so, I don't think someone's crazy for not thinking it's real. I don't think someone's crazy for knowing it's real. I don't know. But I would say an unbiased opinion of the evidence is that it points towards authenticity.
Yeah. Let's just talk about your deets if anybody wants to get a hold of you or whatever. First, before we go there, you were talking to me about the date of the book. It has on Amazon that it's coming out in November. Is there a possible earlier release? Is that still up in the air, or is it going to be November?
Yeah. By the time this episode comes out, you'll probably be able to pre-order anything you like, including an audiobook. If you do the audiobook, you have to download the image PDF because there are a lot of photos. A lot of, if you want to see double superficiality and et cetera, camera obscura, which is a fascinating concept.
Yeah.
It's all in there. So, anyway, so people should be able to pre-order it. It's going to probably be set to November 1st, but if we can get it out sooner, we will.
Yeah. Well,
but it's called Shroud-Pilled. So check it out.
Yeah.
Shroud-Pilled. I think this kind of is a shroud pill for people. I think there's a lot of people who are on the fence who are just like,
that's your audience.
There's a piece of real evidence,
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, there's a piece.
I'm the same way. I mean, I have a Catholic friend that doesn't believe in it. And so it's like, wow, here I am. I guess I'm Protestant. Anglicans really, they're kind of middle of the road. And I wanted to have you on particularly because of your science. But, it's not just that you're a neuroscientist, you're out of your field. Science to me matters more about how you think about things and derive. A scientist in any field can semi-operate if he has the right knowledge and right background reading in any of the true science fields, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that's what I brought to it. There are things that I find get lay people very excited about the shroud that to me didn't really do it for me. Like a lot of the blood evidence.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's AB blood. I don't know. I mean, I understand that.
Well, they're trying to find DNA that's like God's DNA.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
That's the sensational.
I guess I didn't grow. I know nothing about Catholicism, but I didn't realize the Eucharistic miracles are always AB blood, and AB blood is the rarest. Again, it's like okay, but then there's skeptical critiques that AB blood didn't exist 2,000 years ago, but that's also fairly disprovable. So I mean, I did try to say I'm not married to an outcome.
What blood type?
This is fake. It's fake, but that's not what I decided. So,
what blood type is the universal donor? Is it AB?
O is the universal donor.
Okay.
AB is the universal recipient, which people kind of like to make something about that too, being that Jesus received all of the sins of the world and stuff.
Yeah.
It's a blood type. I mean, maybe it is important, maybe it's not. Yeah. I don't know, but in and of itself, to me, it's not evidence of anything. But I mean, this is a photonegative. It encodes depth data. It has double superficiality. The blood was applied first. The blood had started to congeal. It's this person, if painted, was a clinical anatomist. He was an expert beyond measure. He understood thumb injuries better than most physical therapists I know. This person is a savant of every field there is in the world. If it was painted by somebody.
Well, and they let OJ off for 10 times more forensic, and this has more forensic evidence. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm just like, anyway.
Well, if this was anything else, there wouldn't even be a debate. If this was Buddha, it'd be like, oh yeah, this was definitely Buddha's cloth. But the difference is, if this is real, it means the resurrection happened. And so the consequence of this cloth's authenticity is so much bigger than
Yes.
any other artifact or court case. And so, no, the evidence is overwhelming. I mean, it is better than certainly OJ's case.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, every other piece of historical, like we would say without a doubt, oh yeah, this was dates back to the 4th century, right? At least, if not deeper, if it wasn't an image of Jesus,
This brings you back to a decision. You have to decide. This brings you to the decision point that everybody in their faith has to come to. I believe or I don't. And no other anything like this has ever existed.
Mm-mm.
And I think it's important. It's the resurrection. The cross could be proven. I'll talk with people and I say, well, why was Jesus crucified on a cross? Why was he not just numerous other ways? I know it was the Roman thing, whatever, but there's a significance to the cross. But the resurrection, though, that is on a whole nother different scale.
Yeah. And I see a reluctance even from, there's like a Catholic priest who does shroud research and goes on interviews. And even he's like, well, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's evidence of the resurrection. And I'm just like, man, this thing was created by ultraviolet light, maybe plasma. What event happened 2 to 3 days after the crucifixion that could explain that? There's no other hypothesis. Some people have said like maybe there was an earthquake in the tomb and the piezoelectric effect caused electricity. It's like, guys.
My goodness.
It's like, what are we doing here? Like, I now believe there's no piece of physical evidence that could be put into that cloth that would convince a certain proportion of people. I mean, you could, you could have Jesus's genome in that cloth and people would just say, no, it could have been explained by ball lightning or whatever. It's just, like you said, at some point you just got to choose.
Yeah, it comes out of faith. Yeah. And I guess we'll end it there. It comes down to faith, you guys. So thank you so much, Trevor, for joining us on the show. And that they can find you. You have a podcast. Tell me about your podcast. Don't you have a podcast?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's if you want, guys, you go check it out. I do one called Bad Press with my friend. It gets a little weird. He's into conspiracy theories and stuff. But if you want to check it out, go feel free.
Well, we are too. So
okay, cool, good. But also check out, if I can plug my other book, God's Eye View. Quantum physics and neuroscience of the human soul. That's I'm into this now, man. I feel like you're like, what am I going to do with my life? I will spend my life hammering away at biological mechanisms of disease and astrocytes versus microglial cells. I'm into it. I like science, but ultimately, like, I'm not under any delusions that anything I could do in that arena would like really change the world. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry, the academic complex, it's a tough place to like really help people, which is sad. That's unfortunate. That's another conversation for another day. But there are a lot of people like me who were probably atheists for a long time, grew up in the 80s and 90s, and are maybe like sort of agnostic now and like would like to know that it's not irrational to be a Christian, And so I guess that might be my thing now, which is a bad move for someone trying to get grants from the NIH, but it's what I'm doing. So if I lose my job, you guys might need to have me on like once a week to help plug these things.
That's right.
For now, I'm still employed. So.
You're our resident neuroscientist and quantum physicist.
Awesome. Not a quantum physicist. I don't want anyone to call me out. Just neuroscience. But man, how can you not be fascinated with quantum physics? I mean, the rhymes between quantum theory and in the beginning was the word, and Abraham gave up the ghost, and the word became flesh. I mean, it's not quantum science is starting to sound a lot like the Bible. It's really interesting.
It is
phenomenon.
It is. It's fascinating. Well, thank you, Trevor. We enjoyed it, and as always, we'll get you back on for something. I'm sure you'll come up with another project, and we'll dive in. So,
sounds good to me.
All right, dude. Thanks, bro.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.